Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, dear students. How are you? Hopefully you all would be enjoying good health by the grace of Allah Almighty. Students, do you have any pet? Most of you have pets like dogs, cats, parrots, hens, etc. To have a pet is fun and also it is a source of joy for everyone, isn't it? Our today's lesson is also about a little girl, Sam, and his pet dog, Mike. So, unit number 3, Sam was finally pleased. Okay, students, let us have some new words of this lesson. They are Samantha, Micawber, guard, sniffing, excitedly, curtains, crumbs, howling, mournfully, shushed, pen, thought, interfering, wrath, savage, fiercely. Okay, students, there are also some words with Urdu and English meanings related to this unit. They are fond of, shokeen, having a liking, to guard, hifazat karna, watch over, window sill, खिड़की की दहलीज, bottom part of window, launched, हसरत होना, have a strong wish, sniffing, सूंघ रहा था, inhaling, lamp posts, खंबा, a tall pole with light, skating, ring, बर्फ की चादर, a floor used for roller skating, wreath, फूलों की चादर, Christmas decoration, savage, वहशी, fierce, disgrace, सजा, punishment. Okay, students, let's start the reading of unit number 3, that is, Sam was finally pleased. Sam's real name was Samantha, but everyone called her Sam. Sam's dog was named Micawber, but everyone called him Mike. Sam and Mike were very fond of each other. In the mornings, when Sam went to school and Sam's mum and dad and her big sister Liz went to work, Mike stayed at home to guard the house. Okay, students, as you read, Samantha or Sam had a pet dog, Micawber or Mike. They both were very much attached. When everyone of Sam's house went to work, Mike looked after the house. When school was over, Sam walked home with her friend Barney and his dad. As soon as Mike heard Sam's footsteps, he put his front paws on the window sill and barked a joyful welcome. Sam launched to put him on his lead right away and run off up Trotter Street, with Mike pulling her along and sniffing excitedly at gates and lampposts. But Mum was still at work and, as usual, she had arranged for Mrs. Dean next door to keep an eye on Sam until everyone else came home. Okay, students, we have read that Mike looked after Sam's house in the absence of her family. When Sam came back from school with her friend Barney and his dad, Mike welcomed her happily. Sam's mother came home late after Sam, so she had asked her neighbor, Mrs. Dean, to keep an eye on Sam in her absence. Mrs. Dean lived alone with her cat Fluff. Her house was clean and tidy. The lace curtains were snowy white and the floor was polished like a skating rink. Mrs. Dean welcomed Sam with a glass of milk and two plain biscuits. Sam balanced them on her lap and tried not to drop crumbs while she and Fluff and Mrs. Dean sat side by side on Mrs. Dean's beautiful blue sofa and watched television. Kids, Mrs. Dean lived alone with her pet cat Fluff. Her house was very neat and clean. She served Sam with a glass of milk and two biscuits every day when she came to her home. Sam tried to keep the floor clean by not dropping any drop of milk or crumbs of biscuits on the floor. They all used to watch television together. Mike was never allowed into Mrs. Dean's house. He and Fluff got on very badly whenever they met. Sam could hear him howling mournfully next door. "Whatever has got into that dog?" said Mrs. Dean. She opened her front door and shushed at Mike from the doorstep, but he didn't take a bit of notice. He just went on howling. Sam and Mike were both glad when they heard Mom's key into the lock. Okay, students, as we read that Mrs. Dean did not allow Mike to enter her home. Her pet cat Fluff and Mike didn't bear each other. So, when Sam stayed at Mrs. Dean's home, Mike stayed outside making sad voices. Mrs. Dean did not like his voice and she tried to make him away from there. But he didn't take any notice and kept on making sad voices. Sam and Mike became happy when they heard the sound of opening the door of Sam's house. Mrs. Dean's garden was just as neat and tidy as her house. If Mike got in there and started to dig holes searching for imaginary rabbits or picked a fight with Fluff, Mrs. Dean became very cross. Kids, Mrs. Dean's garden was also very neat and clean. If ever Mike entered there to find the rabbits by digging holes in the ground, or he had an encounter with Fluff, Mrs. Dean became very angry. Mrs. Dean didn't even like Mike to be in the street. Sam and Barney and the other children often played in Trotter Street after school, and Mike always joined in. But before long, Mrs. Dean's face would appear at her window. She would tap sharply on the pan, then put out her head and say to Sam, "That dog really ought to be chained up. My poor little Fluff is so frightened she daren't come out." Okay, kids, as you know, Mrs. Dean did not like Mike at all. when Sam and Barney played in the street with other children, Mike was always with them. When Mrs. Dean saw them with Mike from her window, she became angry and asked Sam to chain her dog. She also said that her cat Fluff could not play in the street due to his presence. Or she would say, "Would you mind asking your friends not to sit on my walls?" Or, "A little less noise, dear, please." And that was the end of their game. I am glad Mrs. Dean does not live next door to us, Barney said later when he and Sam were drying their feet. She is always interfering and she hardly ever smiles. Okay, students, as you read earlier that Mrs. Dean did not like Mike. This was not enough. She also disliked children playing in the street. So, she always interfered them to stop their game. Barney said that he was glad not having a neighbor like Mrs. Dean. It was getting near to Christmas. People in Trotter Street were buying Christmas trees and putting up decorations. Mrs. Dean hung a wreath of plastic holly tied with red ribbons on her door. Everyone admired it except Mike, who took a savage dislike to it. He barked fiercely every time he caught sight of it. Sam had a terrible time trying to drag him past Mrs. Dean's house whenever they went for a walk. Okay, students, Christmas was near, so everyone was decorating the house. Mrs. Dean, too, made arrangements for Christmas. She hung a flowers sheet on her door. Everyone liked that, but Mike did not. You know why? Yes, the reason was that Mrs. Dean never liked him, too. He always tried to catch it when he went for a walk with Sam. So it became really hard for Sam to control him. One day, Mike got out on his own and worried the ribbon until he got one end of it between his teeth. Then he pulled the whole thing down and ran off up Trotter Street with the wreath round his neck and the ribbons streaming out behind. Mrs. Dean was very cross indeed. After that, Mike was in bad disgrace. Okay, students, what happened next? One day, Mike went out the house alone. He pulled down the whole flower sheet and ran away with it round his neck. Mrs. Dean became very angry, and Mike was in her bad book forever. Sam was finally pleased when she heard Mrs. Dean telling Mum that she was planning to spend Christmas with her married son. And sure enough, on the very day before Christmas Eve, Sam saw her setting out in a taxi, taking Fluff in a cat basket and a great many parcels. Hurrah! Thought Sam. So, students, we have read Sam became very happy when she heard that Mrs. Dean was going to spend Christmas with her married son. Okay kids, this lesson has been finished, but it has left some moral lessons for us, which are: we should be kind with children and also with animals. We should be the reason of happiness for everyone. Okay students, let's try to answer the following questions. Question number 1. What did Mike do when Sam went to school and returned home? Do you know the answer, kids? Yes, the answer is: when Sam went to school, Mike guarded the house, and when she returned home, he put his front paws on the windowsill and barked a joyful welcome. Question number 2. Give a brief description of Mrs. Dean. You know the answer, kids? Yes, the answer is: Mrs. Dean lived alone with her cat Fluff. Her house was very clean and tidy. She liked Sam but disliked Sam's dog very much. Question number 3. Did Mrs. Dean like Mike and children to be in the street? The answer is: no, Mrs. Dean did not like Mike and children playing in the street. Question number 4. Why did Barney say, "I am glad Mrs. Dean does not live next door to us"? Okay students, do you know the answer? Why was Barney unhappy? The answer is: because Mrs. Dean always interfered the children's play in the street. That is why Barney said so. Question number 5. Why was Sam finally pleased? Okay students, do you know the reason of happiness of Sam at the end? Yes, the reason is: Sam was finally pleased when she heard Mrs. Dean was going to spend Christmas with her married son.